Hello and welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast. I'm your host, Monica Reinagel. A Nutrition Diva listener recently wrote to me worried that she might be eating too much fiber. I have a really high fiber diet, she wrote, because I found it difficult to eat less than 30 grams of fiber a day when I'm eating whole, non-processed foods. I haven't gotten my period in several months, and no, she writes, I'm not pregnant. I take birth control pills. But my dietitian sent me a study about the effects of a high fiber diet on menstruation. And I would love for you to do a podcast episode on how fiber intake may influence menstruation in women of childbearing age. The study that she forwarded was actually somewhat surprising. It found that women eating even the recommended amount of fiber each day had an increased risk of anovulation. And what that means is that they experienced a menstrual cycle in which the egg did not mature. Now, the failure to ovulate may or may not lead to a missed period, but it definitely means that you cannot get pregnant. So this study could be really important to women who are trying to conceive. However, these findings would actually not apply to the listener who sent it to me. Birth control pills, by design, prevent ovulation, no matter how much fiber you eat. If you're taking birth control pills, then your menstrual cycle, such as it is being controlled by external hormones, not your diet. And it is somewhat common for women taking birth control pills to stop menstruating, but again, this usually has nothing to do with diet. If you're regularly missing your period for any reason, it's a good idea to at least check with your gynecologist. But what might this study mean for women who are trying to get pregnant? Should they be cutting down on their fiber to increase their chances? The study, which was published in 2009 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, followed 250 women of childbearing age through 2 consecutive menstrual cycles. And they found that about 8% of the time, the women failed to ovulate. They also collected a lot of dietary information and analyzed it to see if they could see any connections between what the women ate and their risk of anovulation. And they found that the women who were eating the recommended amount of fiber, or at least 22 grams per day, were about 3 times as likely to miss ovulating as everybody else in the study. That may surprise you, but it didn't particularly surprise the researchers. We already know that dietary fiber tends to lower circulating estrogen levels in the body. And generally, we think of this as a good thing. It's likely to be the reason that women who eat more fiber have a lower risk of breast cancer, for example. But for women who are trying to conceive, could lower levels of reproductive hormones be suppressing their fertility? The thing that surprised me most about this study was how few women were actually getting the recommended amount of fiber, fewer than 1 in 10. The majority weren't even getting half the recommended amount. Ladies, we can do better. But this detail is also the thing that throws these results into question. The total number of women who were eating at least 22 grams of fiber per day was so low that the number of anovulatory cycles in that group was also quite low. We're talking single digits. And when the numbers are that small, even one more or less would have had a big impact on the percentages. And that makes it much more likely that much of the statistical difference that they saw here was actually due to random chance. The other tip-off that this finding might be distorted by chance error is that the risk of anovulation stays more or less the same across all the different fiber intake levels and then suddenly triples at the top tier, which, as I say, was not even all that high. Now, the authors acknowledge as much in their remarks, and they also point out that following women for just 2 cycles might not give an accurate view of what the effects might be over a longer time frame. It's that old more research is needed situation. But there is other research to consider, and I'll dig into that right after this short break. As I said, there is some other research on this issue, and it doesn't confirm this finding. A much larger, longer study, the Nurses' Health Study, also analyzed the relationship between fiber intake and ovulatory infertility. Now, this project followed over 18,000 women of childbearing age for almost 10 years. But when they analyzed the dietary records, they found no relationship between fiber intake and the risk of ovulatory infertility. The nurses, by the way, did a slightly better job meeting the recommended fiber intake, but not much. Still, only about 1 in 5 of them met the recommended amount. Ladies, we must do better. Looking at the larger body of science on how diet and nutrition impacts fertility, we see more evidence that higher fiber diets actually promote reproductive health. Being overweight can make it a lot harder to get pregnant, and those who eat more fiber are less likely to be overweight. The insulin resistance that often goes with overweight and obesity can also impair fertility, and diets higher in fiber can reduce the risk of insulin resistance. Several studies have found that a Mediterranean diet pattern seems to be conducive to fertility as well, and the Mediterranean diet tends to be higher in fiber than the standard American diet due to the emphasis on fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and nuts, and it's also linked to a reduced risk of overweight and insulin resistance. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the preponderance of evidence suggests that getting the recommended amount of fiber is going to help your chances of getting pregnant, not hurt it. That doesn't mean that eating 2 or 3 times the recommended amount will help even more. It's always possible to overdo a good thing. But most of us need to step up our game just to get to the recommended amount, which is 25 grams per day for women. In the show notes today, I have a link to my fiber cheat sheet for some tips on foods that are high in fiber. And for tips on increasing fiber without overloading on calories, I've also got a link to my fiber density cheat sheet. Links to both of those resources, along with links to all of the research that I reviewed today, is in the transcript for today's show, which you'll find at quickanddirtytips.com. Thanks so much for this great question. If you have a question that you'd like me to consider for a future podcast, you can call the Nutrition Diva listener line at 443-961-6206. I'd love to hear from you. The Nutrition Diva Show is produced by Nathan Sams, edited by Karen Hertzberg, and our team at Macmillan Audio also includes Morgan Ratner, Emily Miller, Michelle Margulis, and our director, Kathy Doyle. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next week.